Hello, everyone, and welcome to ghtTv, where I bring you amazing entrepreneurs and artists from right here in South Florida. Today, my very first guest, I'm super excited to be introducing Absoloot. This man right here not only is an impact artist, but he is also a philanthropist, a husband, a father, an author, and we're so excited to have him today at ghtTv. How you doing, Ramon?
Awesome, and thanks so much for having me here. I think this is really dope. You know, I love everything you do, so this is like an honor to be the first one on the show.
For me, then try not to clash that. For me, it's really awesome to be able to do, different layers and showcase different layers of me. And I think that's why I was excited to have you, because you're multi-layered, right? You have a lot of different things that you do and that you're involved with. And I think one of the things that speaks to me the most is that you do a lot in the community, and then you put that into your music. So I really want to be able to kind of dive a little bit into that, your not only your personal story and how you got here today, but why philanthropy, right? And I think that's important for us to talk about, because the world is in such a way right now where it's like so much negativity, so much just, they're pushing sex, they're pushing drugs, they're pushing violence, and you are part of the change for that, right? You are an artist that's making music that doesn't talk about sex, doesn't talk about drugs, and let's just say you're talking about getting off of it or telling people not to do it, So I think that's super impactful. So today we're gonna get into a few things, right, into your personal story, but I definitely want to start, with the very beginning, right, of Absoloot. So I want to dive a little bit into your childhood, the makes of who Absoloot is, right? So we're going to peel some layers and get to know Ramon Robinson, okay? So the first question I want to ask you is, when did you realize as a child that music was something that spoke volumes to you?
Very early. I would say I was maybe 6 or 7, and I was just like obsessed with lyrics. That was with any music. I find it amazing how people create stories to music, right? And I've always been that way. Still now, when I hear a good song, it's like I'm amazed. I love hearing people that can actually create a story to song. I think that's one of the most amazing things. And so when I was very young, I was just fascinated by music. I listened to a lot of Sting and Phil Collins and Steely Dan, and not so much hip hop. My father listened to a lot of jazz, and so I would listen to all these artists that were just amazing lyricists. And then when I started really getting into hip hop, I was maybe 11 or 12. And it was just like, what is this? And how are these people creating this? I remember, it blew my mind. I remember my older sister, Cynthia, she was really into poetry. And so she rapped a lot. And I just thought she was the most amazing person on earth because she could do this. And my whole life, that's all I wanted to do. Now, I wasn't trying to sell out a stadium. I just wanted to learn how to do that. And so, over the years, I've been, just practicing and working at that. But it started very, very early. And I just was always fascinated with lyrics the same way I am now.
I think creatively, that's really important for us to know, as creatives, is like where things came from, where things started. And I think 11 or 12 for hip hop is pretty young. So what was Ramon listening to? Because you definitely Absoloot wasn't thought of yet, right? So what was Ramon listening to, and not just what were you listening to, but how were you connecting with that music? Because I could tell you, for me, I was listening to bad stuff, but I wasn't necessarily doing bad things. There are people that listen to bad stuff and they do bad things, right? So what music were you listening to? And then what was that music driving or inspiring you to do in that current time?
So a lot of the music that I was listening to, I was just pretty much listening to whatever my sister was listening to, because I couldn't go get my own, records or anything like that. And so I would listen to Big Daddy Kane. She would listen to him a lot. I can't really think of a whole lot of people, but it was really like Queen Latifah. And so they were rapping about something at that time, right? And so the lyrics were about what was going on in the community. And so just listening to that and taking that in, it made me look at my community, look at the things around me, and try to create something similar to what they were creating, right? And so I started that very young, and just wanting to write about things that were actually happening. And so just because my sister was doing that, that was like, I just looked up to her so much, and the fact that she was so good at it, right? That lit a fire in me to want to be able to do the same thing. But again, she was listening to Queen Latifah. She was listening to, even Diggable Planets. I remember listening to Diggable Planets with my older cousin Lee. And there was such a love because Diggable Planets had a real like jazzy feel to it. And mind you, I'm growing up listening to Steely Dan and Dave Brubeck and a lot of jazz musicians. Yeah. And so it blended all of this. And it really just blew my mind how hip hop was using rock and roll and jazz and these different genres of music and then adding that like poetry aspect to it. And so I'm, as you can see, still really fascinated by hip hop and those that are actually lyricists and using the music to say something.
I love that you touched on poetry because a lot of people don't know and just quick, plug in, right? That amazing book back there behind you, RAP, right? It stands for rhythm and poetry. A lot of people don't even know that is the make of hip hop, right? That is the make of rap. That's literally what it stands for. So you could have just easily been a poet, right? So what made you not do spoken word or poetry, but rap instead? Because now you have different elements, right? You have a beat, you have rhyme scheme, right? You have a rhythm that you have to follow. It's much, much more different than spoken word because as an artist, especially me as a freestyler, I kind of just spit whatever comes to mind in the moment and I don't have a flow necessarily. But let's say I was told to rap it, then I would have some type of flow to it. And this man right here, like Twista, we love you and all. Busta, we love you and all, but no, we do. We still do and all. But you are that. You rap so fast. So I want you to dive into that. When did you say rap is the direction, not poetry, not spoken word? Because that's what your sister was doing.
So I think it was just the fact that they could do the poetry to the music that way, right? And so you can go fast, you can do all these things with it. And so that's the thing that really stood out to me. And I did poetry for a little bit, but it was like, it's not the same as rapping, right? And so I just always love rapping. I still write some poetry and I love to write. I love the fact that you're creating these things with just whatever's in your mind, right? And so I still have a love for poetry. I will always have a love for poetry, but being able to do it to the music, that's like a whole different thing. Like that's my high to be able to do that.
I love that because I still will, right? Shout out to Maury Taiyu, who was one of our very recent trading card dignitaries. She is very prideful in the concept of poetry music, right? Where it's poetry, but it still has music behind it. As an artist, as a rapper, you as well, how would you say, do you think that complements the industry? Do you think that conflicts? Because it could, in my opinion, cause confusion, but at the same time, it kind of puts us in our own lane, which the Grammys actually just recently opened up a spoken word category. So for the spoken word community, that was huge. So give me your intake and perspective on that.
Well, I feel like spoken word is very important to hip hop. Right. I don't think we should lose or pick one or the other. I think they both serve a purpose. And I think spoken word speaks to different people on a different note than hip hop does, for instance. I know people that are much more into spoken word I think it's easier to consume sometimes. Right. Because you don't have all the music and everything behind it to where you can get lost in some of that. And that happens in music. Just in general, you can get lost in the music and not really catch the words. So I think spoken word is a very important piece to hip hop. And it always has been. All right. And it's spoken word is big globally. And like, you don't realize how powerful poetry is until somebody close to you passes. Right. And so it's like, we don't realize how poetry influences us until we're really going through something. We hear a poem or somebody says something to us that really touches our soul, right? And so I think poetry serves a very important piece to hip hop, but also other genres of music as well.
Now, I love that you mentioned the grieving part. I'm just gonna get a little touchy here, but you recently, had your nephew pass, right? You wrote a song to him, so beautiful. You dedicated that to him. As an artist, what does that do for you mentally, and how does that either propel you forward or put you on pause, or just what does that do? Because that's so tough. Like I lost my grandma and I've never, I've never experienced a loss. So for me, it was I had to pull myself together, not only hosting her or emceeing her funeral, but even editing her video and being the creator and producer behind that. I'm literally rewatching people cry and people give feedback about my grandma over and over as a creative. I already had to put my granddaughter hat on, cry, be sad. Then I had to put my daughter hat on, be strong for my mom. Then I had to put my goddaughter / niece hat on so it's a lot. So for you as an artist, you made that song and you continue in your career, right? Talk about how that, what that does for you. It could either be, whichever direction it is, there's no right or wrong answer, but I want to know a little bit more about that because I think that that's something that we're never prepared for, right? God forbid someone very close to you passes away right now as we're doing this interview. You're going to be different tomorrow.
Honestly, for me, it was just kind of therapeutic, just telling them I love them, right? That's all it was. It wasn't me trying to go anywhere with it, but I just had to get that off my chest. That's really what that was about. And I'm still grieving, still having a lot of difficulty with it. And it's funny because after I wrote that, I just haven't had the inspiration to write anything else. Oh, wow. Right. And because he was getting into music and he was so involved and he really looked up to me as an artist. And the last conversation we had was him saying that how proud he is to be my nephew. And that just that makes it difficult moving forward at times for me. Mm-hmm. But I did that as just a dedication. And it was really just between the two of us. I had to let him know how much I love him.
It's tough. Is this the same nephew that made you want to switch your lyrics? No, okay. That would have been fire, right? Just the way that comes full circle. But nonetheless, it's, a loss is a loss. What I meant by that in saying fire, just it coming full circle. Right. Obviously, the lost part is not fire at all. Right. But just having that impact, right? Like you even talk about that in your story, and I've seen your interviews. I've interviewed you on Phoenix Mag, so you spoke about it there. But there was a point where you were doing music, right? And you decided to change. But before we get into that, because that's going to be like the meat and potatoes of this, I want to talk a little bit about Ramon's inspirations. This is still before Absoloot, right? So who were you looking to as a kid? And it doesn't necessarily have to be musically, but just in general, because the people that inspire us push us to do things and they might not even be in that lane, right? Like my father is a musician, but he inspired me to be creative. My grandmother, rest in peace, she was a seamstress, but she inspired me to be a fashionista. So everyone had either some type of role where they could touch it, but not necessarily, I'm the only poet in my family. There's never been a poet in my family. So what is that like on your side? Who were you looking to and how did they mold, who Ramon is, and that turned into Absoloot?
I'm extremely blessed in that sense because I grew up around a lot of strong people. My grandmother was definitely one of the largest influences on me. My grandmother and my grandfather. My grandmother actually passed about 4 months after my nephew, right? And so at this time, I'm like, dealing with all of this death around me that's hitting so close to home. But my grandmother, my father was a very big influence. My mother is a very, very big influence. And I was talking to my mother the other day, and the funny thing is, my parents owned a mortgage business school when I was a child, right? And so one of the things that I would help my mom do is put books together as a child, right? And so my father was a singer in a gospel group. And so now I'm doing music like my father and I'm doing books like my mother, right? And a lot of the philanthropy and the work that we do in the community with Positivity Pays, a lot of that came from my grandmother. Because one of the things that we would always do when we went out to Texas is we would feed the homeless. We used to do so much charitable work that it stuck with me. And I know if I want to see change, then I have to create the change that I would like to see, right? And so I was taught that at a very young age. And so that to this day is what I think about in the community. I'll see something on TV and instead of me saying, oh, this is horrible or whatever, and then going on about my day, I say, what can I do to change that? How can I make that better? How can I help these people? And so that's how my mind has been working since I was a child because of my grandmother, that influence that she gave me. And so I'm still doing those same things. And again, I'm just blessed that I've had so many people in my life that were strong, caring, loving people that have influenced me to do something good with my life.
I love that you said and touched on aspects of family, because I think normally when I ask people, who were your inspirations, they'll go into their celebrity catalog, and then there's nothing wrong with that. But when it's family, it hits much closer to home. And when you say creating books, like I've seen you on Netflix, and Netflix, that show kind of taught me how to make books. So you were really doing the glue and the adhesive. You were doing all of that.
We were hole punching books for her class the next day. We did it all. I mean, my mother would write these textbooks, and then we would have to put everything together, and then I remember she would pay us per book. And that's one of the things I used to love to do, is just sit in the living room with her and create these books with her. And so to this day, I'm still doing these things. And I actually love to do this, but it's because of the influence that she's had over my life.
I love that. And especially when you have something that you can connect with a parent, right? Because I'm a super daddy's girl. You were there at the release for the book and the album when I played the guira with my father. Yeah. For me, that's a huge deal, because in my country, in Dominican Republic, women don't play those instruments. Women are not percussionists per se. You're either a singer if you are in music, or you're a dancer. You're never one of the musicians. It's like, no, that's for men only, So to be able to break that stigma, stand beside my father, I can't even say he taught me, because it just came natural. So it came from him, because he didn't sit there and literally teach me. I promise, I just picked it up one day and I was naturally amazing. Like, I looked at my wrist like, oh my God, how did you do that? So to hear you say that you built books, like you made books, like now you're literally making books, but not in that way. Technology has advanced us. So I love that, especially that you touched on your mom. I want to kind of pivot a little bit more into School You, right? Because School You probably had a lot of faces. I only know one of them. The school version of Ramon, right? So I understand you were an athlete, right? You played basketball. So why basketball? And talk a little bit about how basketball structured you as a person. Because anyone out there who was an athlete, if you were an athlete, especially if you were a good athlete, then you know that it had a lot to do with sportsmanship. It had to do with persistence. And these are transferable skills, right? Like you don't necessarily have to, be in the NBA for these skills to go with you. So talk a little bit about that, the athlete Absoloot.
I don't talk about this much, but so my father was a really good basketball player, right? And so my father played college ball, and I think he was the leading rebounder in California in college, and rebounder and scorer, right? And so he was just an amazing basketball player. And so growing up, you have this guy who's doing all this stuff on the court, dunking and all kinds of crazy things. As a child, I'm looking up to my father like, I want to be able to do that too, And so I started playing basketball, just seeing my father he was so good at it that I wanted to play. And that's kind of what, that's kind of what drove me to play basketball. And I was blessed to be able to travel and do a lot of things that I was able to do in basketball. I didn't go pro or anything like that, but I didn't have the same love that he had for the game. Like my love has always been music. And so I've been able to do a lot with music because that's where my passion is. And that's all I've wanted to do.
Did you ever have a point where the things that you were doing conflicted? I'll give you a reference, right? Like High School Musical, right? That's a very ordinary storyline of a guy who's an athlete who loves his sports. His dad is the coach in the movie, right? So his dad absolutely wants him to be an athlete, but he's a thespian. He wants to act. He wants to be in theater. He wants to be on Broadway. So there was internal conflict there, right? It was the dad versus the son. Are you laughing because I'm quoting High School Musical?
Laughing because I know you so well and you're creating this story. Like I'm a thespian in the story and my dad is the coach. This is hilarious to me. No, I've never. It does, but that it didn't work that way, right? So I was on the basketball team. My dad came to the games. My dad was something else at the games, right? He was yelling and screaming. It was a whole different thing. I don't think you would be able to air some of the things my dad said at the games. So it didn't go that way, but I didn't start, I was so shy, like when it came to music, that until I was 22, I didn't let anybody hear anything I wrote.
So it was kind of like a secret.
Oh yeah. So nobody knew that I was rapping or anything like that until I was older. And I mean, all through high school, even in middle school, I was writing. And I had written thousands of raps by the time, I actually let somebody hear one of them.
What was the rhythm like? I'm gonna give this microphone right back to you right now. Like, what was the rhythm like in your head?
It depends on the mood. It really does. So even now, like it really depends on the mood I'm in. Everything for me is emotion. I just kind of go off the emotion, right? And so if I'm going through something difficult or stressed out, the rhythm is a lot slower, right? And when I'm upbeat, that rhythm picks up pace, and then that's when you get the twisted and doing different things.
What about that speed? Where did you get this speed technique from? Because listen, just pause this video, open another tab. Look up Absoloot, because the way you rap is, to me, first of all, it's immaculate, because it's not only fast, but I understand you, right? And that's why I was halfway shading a little bit Twista, because I love him, but I don't understand him necessarily. I have to go on lyricstop.com to see what he's saying, right? So for you, you're rapping super fast, but I can hear you. So talk about that technique and that skill level, because for most people that I've played your music for, that's what they gravitate to. Like, yo, like, oh my God, like, because it's not easy to do that. And it's not only how you're doing it, it's what you're saying. So talk about that technique side, that technical side of, Absoloot as a rapper.
Well, yeah. So that's why I love rap is that you can kind of do different things, as far as the melody goes. Like, you can really change things up when you're writing, right? And it takes a lot of skill and technique to be able to rap a lot faster with it. And so it's not that I'm actually rapping faster, it's that my rhyme scheme gets closer, right? And so I'm bringing certain rhyming words closer together instead of spreading them out so much. How sometimes people rhyme at the end of the bar or the beginning of the bar. I put a lot of those rhyming words like throughout that bar. And so it sounds like I'm going fast, but I'm not actually rapping faster, right? And so just being able to learn these things.
So I definitely want to ask in terms of, your positive messaging in your music, right? One of the things that I love that you always touch on, that you say is you had some lyrics that, when you started rapping that your nephew uttered, right? And you didn't really feel comfortable with, the type of lyrics you were putting out, wanting him to say those things and what have you. So you went in a different direction, right? You completely took out profanity. You completely took out talking about negative things, but you stuck it out. Right. And a lot of times, and we see it all the time, right, where rappers are saved by God or something and they go into gospel, which is great. I support that. But then they go right back a few months later. They don't see it through. They don't see it all the way to the end. So I want you, as not only Absoloot the artist, right, but Ramon the person who saw, or the uncle who saw his nephew, I want you to dive a little bit deeper into that, of why you decided to seek it through, because still years later, there ain't not one curse word in any of that music, right? And I think that speaks volumes to the type of person that you are, not only, again, as an artist, but as a person of, impact. So talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So my thing, what I realized when my nephew was rapping these lyrics is that I was the one being controlled. Right. And then I was putting him under the same influence that I was already under. Right. And so there's a much larger picture that I was able to see, because I could see immediately how it would affect somebody that I love dearly. Right. But then I think about all the other kids, the millions of kids that are consuming this negative music. Right. My nephew is around some amazing people because we have amazing people in our family. All these kids are not surrounded by amazing people, right? And so to have them around negative people and consuming negative lyrics and, getting this negative images on TV, how does a child make it through these things, right? And so that's what I think about all the time is I may not necessarily create music specifically for children, but I know children are going to listen. So why would I put anything in that they can consume that's poisonous to them mentally? And so personally, I just couldn't do it anymore, right? The second I saw that, I said, there's no way, because I know that either influence my nephew, somebody who I love dearly, or it's going to influence somebody's child that somebody else loves dearly. And I don't want that on me, right? And so I made sure that from that moment that I was always going to do something positive, that if you use anything that I've said, that it would only be used to help somebody, right? And so I try to write in that way too. But there's a much larger picture to this. Like, there's so many reasons to do something positive, right? And just the way it affects the community, the people around you. But when you look at a lot of the music, and that, because I'm so into music, and I look back and I think about when I was young listening to Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson wasn't cursing. Michael Jackson wasn't using the N-word. Michael Jackson wasn't violent, right? You listen to Bob Marley, you don't get any of that. Stevie Wonder, you don't get any of that. And it's like, why do I have to do that? If these are the largest artists in the world, the largest artists we've ever heard or seen, right? They're all positive artists, right? There's no negative coming from Michael Jackson's music, or, you know, and so those are the things I started to think about. And it was like, why is hip hop used to push violence, right? And then you look at the people who are actually putting out and distributing this music, and then you start to realize, oh, they're using the music for a different purpose, right? And so I didn't want to be controlled in that way. I didn't want to be putting that kind of negative influence out. And when I was doing that, I actually started hip hop. When I first started rapping, I was clean. I didn't curse then, right? And I changed because I started to get deals, and people were saying, oh, we'll pay you to do this. You kind of, you know, have to put this into the music. And so I started adding these things into the music, and I realized they're just controlling what I talk about. They're controlling the actual music. They've influenced me so much that I'm only going to write about the things that they want me to write about. And it was like, you know, there's, again, so many reasons why I don't do it now, you know, and those are just a few.
Wow. Talk about, you know, having to understand your true value and purpose, right? Because when you're given the opportunity to get, you know, $1 million deal or whatever, it seems like, yeah, I want that. And you don't know what that comes with. Right. And then it comes with all these things that, you know, could be detrimental, not only to your brand, but perhaps your message, your purpose, right? And in you seeing that through, I think that, you know, that's super dope. You know, it makes you more valuable as, you know, as a community agent, in my opinion. And I think that more people should look to artists like you, because rap is rooted in negativity. And I've never understood that, you know, because it's supposed to be the music of liberation, the music of the movement, the music for the people, you know, like it's supposed to be our message, our as a people. And it's completely taken a different direction to where, like, artists even make statements like, oh, I don't make music for kids. But it's like, how could you say that? You know, like, kids are the main source of the music intake, right? Like, they're, especially now in this digital age, like, they're the ones listening. So for you to continue on that path forward and continue to be an impact artist, I think it's amazing. I think it just allows us to say, hey, stop listening to whatever you're listening to and write some notes on what they're talking about.
But you know, there are artists out there that are doing a lot of positive with their music, or actually talking about something. There's the J. Cole's, there's the Kendrick Lamar's, there's the Alexander Starr. There's a lot of artists out there that are actually doing really dope stuff, and doing it in a way where they're influencing positive outcomes instead of pushing negative. But that's a great way to stop a movement. Think about that. If you can control one of the sources of these movements, absolutely, you can stop the movement.
I want to touch on the state of hip hop, right? Because besides doing music, you also produce books, right? You produce trading cards, and this is such an amazing setup. I love that you brought these cards out. Your messaging goes beyond music. It goes into, you know, children reading books. It goes into Grace magazine. You're putting your positive energy into different places. What does that do in terms of the state of hip hop for you as an artist, right? Like, it doesn't conflict, but it complements. But how do all those things kind of gel together?
For me, one of the things that I learned is it's where you put yourself, right? In my circle, the negativity doesn't exist, but I know for a lot of other people it does. Again, I'm listening to Alexander Starr, so I don't get the same negative kind of intake, as you said, that some other people would do, because I just don't listen to that type of music, right? And so I don't consume any of it, so I don't know you know, who's doing this or who's saying that, because I understand that the media is pushing the narrative. And so I, because I'm older, I know how to avoid these things. And I'm looking for artists that are similar to the artists that I already like, right? So I'm not involved in that at all. But one of the things that we do at Positivity Pays when it comes to the comic books, which started off as just a lyric book, right? We're doing these things on people who've had positive impacts, right? And so we're trying to always create around that positive and push the positive narrative, because so many kids need to hear that.
And I had no idea. I think I just learned something today. I didn't know that the comic book started as lyric books, which you were the reason I even created one, right? You gave me the idea. It was never in my head. As a poet, I was just like, all right, I'm going to produce a book of poems. But it's like, nah, make it a lyric book so it goes to your album, and it makes for a better rollout, right? So if you would have never told me that, I would have never thought in that direction. So your brain is constantly reconfiguring how to put out positive messaging and how to have people connect with your art. And I just want to say thank you, you know, for giving me that and allowing me to feel and own the power really of the songs, because that's what they are. You know, my poetry is my music to my heart. It goes to the beat of my heart. And when I read what I wrote, it's so different than just hearing it or just performing it. You know, each element is different. When I perform, it's a different element than when I hear myself. When I read myself, it's different than when I hear myself. You know what I mean? So all of the variations vary. You obviously have a lot of variation and you know, versatility to you. Your trading cards here are a vast amount of people, different kinds of people. You have politicians up there, you have teachers up there, you have community figures up there, poets there. Talk about the range in the type of people that, you know, Positivity Pays recognizes, and how you as a impact artist yourself kind of go into that selection process, because you're looking for people that are making a difference, but you're making a difference. So the standard is very high.
One of the things I learned in business, because at the end of the day, this is what this is, right? And so even doing, in creating music, if you don't learn the business aspect, you're not going to have a whole lot of success, right? And so over the years, I've been learning about the actual business of music, right? And so there are so many people that play roles in that, right? And you see a video on TV and you're just like, oh, this artist is dope. But it's like, who created the visuals, right? Who are some of the writers on that, right? And so there's so many aspects of this that we miss. And so with the trading cards, what we try to do is we try to highlight all these aspects within life that are important, right? And so you get the pastor, because he's inspiring people to do good things, right? He's pushing a positive message, right? He's motivational. There's all these wonderful things, depending on the pastor, that you get from that particular pastor. And then you have the sheriff. Why is that so important? Because this is the person who's policing the community, right? And so you want to have all these relationships. You want to have the relationship with the business people in the community so you can understand how some of these businesses work, right? And so for us, it's like, how do we expose the youth to some of these people we've been exposed to? We've been exposed to some of the most amazing people, but it's like, you know, if I meet somebody, I can't really share that with my daughter and the rest of the people in the community. So a wonderful way to share some of these relationships with people is through the trading cards, right? So you get a Ben Crump trading card and you get to trade that with other people. You get to read a little bit about Ben Crump and see why he's so amazing, what makes him remarkable, the fight that he's taken up that nobody was taking up. And so you see what an amazing person he actually is. And so we just thought it was important for us to start showcasing these people, so that it's not only our youth, but others around us could see, right? You never know who's going to inspire you. And so these trading cards for us are just a huge piece of inspiration for the whole community.
I love that. I definitely want to ask, in terms of your impact, right? What kind of impact do you want to leave in the world, right? We all are going to leave this world one day, right? For someone like you who, you know, you're every day, you know, you're battling every day. I am just so moved by you because, you know, me knowing your personal story with your heart condition and this and that, that's very loud, you know, to even, you know, you mentioned Alexander Starr, he's a diabetic, right, you know, and he continues forward. And, I kind of went through a lot, just being the daughter of someone whose dad had like 7 strokes and, 2, 3 heart attacks. And Papi is as strong as he can be. You saw him at the release. Does it look like that man ever had a stroke? So that type of resilience really is very loud, and you have that because you live every day almost as if it were your last, because every day you do something dope, every day you do something impactful. So talk about driving yourself through that and not allowing either your circumstances to cripple you. If anyone ever saw this man on a cast, he was getting it done with an Achilles torn up. So how do you propel forward, and how does that impact you as, the type of lasting impact you want to have? Because there's so many things working against you, yet you...
Wow. I'm not sure where to go with that. But my legacy, I want it to be love. Like, I want people to feel like someone cares, that they are supported, that they can do some of these things. Because there's so much that I've been able to do I never thought I'd be able to do, right? And especially in the music industry, when I said that I wasn't going to curse anymore and I wasn't going to do certain things, I remember I got hit with so much negativity. It was crazy. It's like, so because I want to be positive, like nobody's going to want to, right? No one wants to hear that, right? And so I had, just an extreme amount of negativity. And I remember, so one of the stories I don't talk about a lot is before I made the decision, right, to really go positive with all the music. I remember the feds came in, and because of one of the record execs we were working with was actually selling drugs. I was not. I had nothing to do with anything like that. But the feds came in and confiscated everything. And they cars, everything. And it was a really bad time in my life. I was maybe about 23 years old at the time. And I had attached so much of what I thought was success to material things. And it's because I was young, I didn't know what success was, right? And so I'm thinking of it as because I have money or I drive a nice car that I'm successful, right? Not because I'm doing what I love to do or I want to do or I'm in control of my own destiny. I didn't have any of those thoughts or ideas. I didn't know what that was. And the feds took everything, right? And so I had to move in with my parents and my father. The reason I bring this up is to show you, again, how my father played such a huge role. I was dealing with depression seriously at this time because, again, I had tied a lot of what I thought I was to just material possessions. And my father was like, look, we can do this ourselves, right? He went online and he found somebody that pressed up CDs locally. We were in Jacksonville at the time. And then he was Googling and he found the studio in Tampa and he was like, hey, let's go. And I was like, yeah. And so that really pushed me to start writing again because I had stopped for a while and start writing again. And that's in the moment, go to church and my nephew singing these lyrics. And this is the music that I was making before the feds came in, right? And I just was like, it was like God was telling me as clear as day, this is why you don't do that. Right. And so I made that decision here in my nephew. And I was like seeing that how it influenced him. Right. Because he was just proud. Like, this is my uncle doing this stuff. Right. And seeing that it could influence him so easily, I was like, never again. And so we start just doing only clean and positive music. But the second I said that, nobody wanted to work with us. And so the studio that my father found, the guy had never even recorded anybody in hip hop. He was only doing country music and rock and roll. And so he was like, yeah, I'll take you guys on, let me see what you can do. And we were driving down to Tampa. So we're driving like 5 and 6 hours just to start recording music, right? My dad would just sit in there with me. I'd be writing and stuff. And so we created this album called My Way, and that was the first clean, like, positive album. Submitted it to the Grammys. We got an invite, and we went out to L.A. For the Grammys. That was in 2009. But it was, just being next to so many celebrities and realizing that these are now my peers. I'm not looking up to them the same way. I'm sitting next to them. Right. And so that gave me so much confidence and let me know I was doing the right thing, and that just really pushed me to say, like, some of that other stuff, like, because I didn't have the same opportunities when I was doing negative music because the only opportunities I had is the opportunities that they were willing to give me. Right. with doing positive music, I created my own opportunities. So I can see success a lot different now than I could when I was a lot younger.
And we got through all of the range of you, right? So from childhood to teenager to what did I call it earlier, to basketball, school you, right? So we touch on all aspects of you. One aspect I definitely want to touch on is the one that people never put out, right? Your social media is all artist driven. It's all positivity pays. It's all great things you're doing in the community. But you are a husband. You are a father. How does that come into the fold in terms of the type of work you're putting out? You know, Olivia, your daughter, she's an author, right? So at the young age of 8, she produced her very first book. So you're obviously instilling in her, you know, great values, and she's making money already. You know, she's a young entrepreneur. But talk about those hats that you put on as a husband and as a father.
It's like I'll learn something and then I take that home with me, right? And then at home, I'll learn something and I'll take that out in the world with me, right? And so it's like I'm just sharing the good things that I'm learning at home with the rest of the world. And then the good things that I learn within the world, I take home. So, for instance, Olivia writing her book, my business partner and I, Brandon Freeney, we started just kind of Googling how to publish books and how to get illustrators, all these things, because I had never been exposed to that, right? And so I created books with my mother, but we're using a hole punch and we're doing it a certain way, and so we're not publishing it the same way. We're not putting this material out online, and so I had to learn some of these things. But the second I started learning this, I was like, you know what? I want my daughter to understand how these businesses work, right? And so the thing that was most important to me is to be able to explain it to her, so that she could create something. Because you know the joy you get from something that you create in the world is amazing, right? And you really can't duplicate that feeling, right? And so I wanted her to have that confidence and that understanding that she could do something with or without me, right? And just be so confident in herself and her own skills. And so that's one of the reasons why we did that book, is I wanted her to do something and say, this is mine. This is what I created, right? And just have something of her own. And so that's where that comes from, but that's something I learned in the world. And just from being her father, there's so much that I see in her, right? And there's such a love that I have for her that I didn't even know existed, right? And so the way I look at my daughter, I feel like someone feels that way about everybody, right? And so how can I love on people in the same way and let them know that somebody's there, right? And so these are things that I'm constantly thinking about, especially all the youth that we work with. They don't have the same household, but I still want them to understand somebody cares, somebody's listening. I make sure that, you know, I'm always available to a lot of the youth that we work with. And so I learn these things at home and just dealing with Olivia, and it's like I take that back out in the world. And that helps me tremendously, just being a father.
And shout out to Olivia on this show. We love her here. Well, that wraps up our interview. You feel good now? You feel it?
I know you can come up with, like, you're so creative. And just being around a lot of creative people, like, they'll come up with things and it just blows your mind. So when you're like, oh yeah, I got some questions, I was like, what are the questions though? Cause school you. I was like, oh boy, you're gonna get me in trouble. But yeah, no, this is dope, and congratulations on creating the show and doing your own thing. And the cue cards are amazing. That's being creative. The lips on the phone, like Hello. This is all like super creative. But when you're in your own like comfort zone, you're in your own space, you get a chance to do these things, and nothing can replace the feeling of being able to create something just with the thoughts and ideas in your mind, right? And so this is so dope. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Well, y'all, make sure that you follow Absoloot, okay? And you just recently changed your Instagram.
HQ on the back.
Okay, so it's absolute.hq.
No, just Absoloot HQ.
Okay, Absoloot HQ, the headquarters of Absoloot, okay? Of course, you can find me at Frankie Red Words, and also be sure to follow the Phoenix Magazine. Big shout out to Phoenix for producing this. Also, huge shout out to Handy, of course. Handy sponsored this beautiful, amazing room that you guys see, these chairs, just everything. So thank you so much, Handy, Kirk Brown, and all of our friends over there. We truly appreciate you. Alfred, thank you so much for helping us with lighting and sound. We just really really appreciate it. It takes a village. Brandon Freeney, who's in the building, we appreciate you. The Phoenix Mag, this was amazing. Be sure to subscribe to Red Words on YouTube and look out for the next Red Light TV. Red Light TV was brought to you in part by Handy Homes, Positivity Pays, and the Phoenix TV. Thank you to our sponsors. Get to know Positivity Pays, a nonprofit organization dedicated to spreading positivity to our communities through service, education, and advocacy. Meet our team, co-founders Brandon Freeney and Ramon Robinson, and your director, your favorite chica, Frankie Red. We're dedicated to creating trading cards, clothing, books, any form of creative leadership merchandise for our leaders. We also dedicate to creating creative writing workshops for K through 12, where students get to learn how to think, write, and express. One of our favorite things to do is create comic books surrounded around history for the purpose of education. This is how we bridge literacy and creativity. Most importantly, we enjoy building community. Here at Positivity Pays, everything that we do is engulfed in building community, and we want you to join us on our mission as we continue to spread love and positivity.